Hi, my name is Steve Rahi. I am a premier field engineer specializing in management technologies. Today's discussion is part 5 of an ongoing series focused on client apps in Microsoft Intune. Specifically, today's discussion will focus on apps and, even more specifically, Windows, deploying apps to Windows devices. So let's get started. Here's our agenda. So we're going to really quickly talk through what are apps, why apps. We all pretty much understand that, and then really dig into apps specifically, working through some of the requirements, and then focusing on scenarios. There are a few scenarios that I'm going to demonstrate in the session today. Store apps, being able to deploy store apps, being able to deploy Office 365 to Windows. There's also the ability to deploy web links to Windows. Line of business as well, so we'll look at MSI and MSI X both. And then finally, look at Windows apps, and this is specifically the Win32 apps, specifically executable based installs that might need to be deployed. Each of those sections will have some tips and tricks of their own and some troubleshooting stuff of their own, and then we will have a general troubleshooting section as we kind of wrap up the session. Today. All right, so let's jump right in. So, what are apps? Well, put simply, apps are app deployment. So you use the apps node of the client app section in Intune to configure app deployment to your various devices. Again, today's focus is Windows. Apps, very robust, right? From where Intune started to where it is as of this recording, much has changed and much has advanced to where the app deployment capabilities of Intune are very robust, right? Very flexible, as well. Being able to put out have a modern approach for app deployment is definitely true of Intune. And also, while being modern, being able to hold on to the things that are in fact familiar, right? Now, one of the things that oftentimes does come up in terms of apps is folks will ask the question, what about apps in Intune versus apps in Config Manager? There are still more capabilities in Config Manager than there are in Intune, such as maintenance windows and scheduling capabilities and so on, right? But what we have in Intune today is very robust. In fact, the Windows app section, the Win32 stuff that I showed you and we'll talk about a little bit later, is very much like the app model in Config Manager. In fact, when you see that, you're going to realize that it's effectively the app model in Config Manager, and you would be absolutely correct. So we will detail that when we get to it. And more about that specifically, as we'll get to it, we'll show it to you. But there is this thing called the Microsoft Intune Management Extension, and that extension is what is used to handle the Win32 app deployments, the Windows app deployments. But we'll talk about that more in a separate session. I'll certainly show it to you more when we get to that section. So why do we want to worry about deploying apps? Well, again, uh, this should be fairly familiar to those that are watching this video, but having ability to consistently deploy an application across your network, having that application be managed, having it be a routine thing that you deploy across your network, absolutely. In terms of app requirements, well, the first thing is we're talking about a lot of different types of apps that we're going to deploy, and so each one of them will have their own requirements. So requirements will vary. Uh, in general, absolutely, this is Windows 10. This is not Windows 7. This is not Windows 8. It is Windows 10 only that we're talking about, because Windows 10, well, I guess you could say Windows 8 in some cases, but effectively Windows 10, because that's really where we are today and where the MDM channel really is alive, and Intune delivers management through the MDM channel. Again, Windows 8.1, yeah, it does have some of that, but the focus here is really Windows 10 and so on. Content storage and size. So this is one that I will repeat as we get near the end of the session, but it's important to understand, so we'll lay it out here. Um, So when you deploy apps with Intune, there will be content that needs to come down related to those apps. Now, some of the app types that you would deploy really don't have content that you need to upload into Intune, but some of them do. And so, whenever you're uploading content into Intune to deploy to your devices, you need to be aware of a couple of things. So if you're using a free Intune tenant, kind of a trial tenant, then you are limited to a total size of 2 GB that you can upload to Intune for your testing. If you have a paid tenant, then you don't have any size limitations at all. You can upload as much content as you need to upload to get your requirements met. But regardless of paid or trial wouldn't matter because you have a 2 GB total limit. But for paid, for a full Intune subscription, you are limited to a total of 8 GB for a single file size. So if you have files that exceed 8 GB, that's not going to work. Intune content, or the content won't work in the Intune storage. It needs to be, each individual file needs to be less than 8 GB. Again, you'll see that a couple of times as we go through. All right. So let's get to the scenario specifically. We're going to walk through these. I've already shown them to you. We'll start with some of the, I guess, easier ones, so to speak. Being able to deploy store apps, being able to deploy Office 365 to Windows devices, just being able to deploy web links. So if you have an app that works in a website, it's not really physically installed on the device, you can deploy a link to that app, no problem at all. Then we'll talk about line of business. Going to show you a couple of examples there, and we will wrap up talking about Windows app deployment, specifically Win32 apps, and specifically their executable. So let's get to it. All right, so the first one, store apps, right? Store app scenario. So how does that specifically work? So the way store apps work is the first thing that the admin needs to do is determine the store app that you want to deploy to your users, right? And so that's a matter, I'll show you in a minute, of going and browsing the internet, finding the app in the Microsoft Store, copying off and saving the URL to that app in the Microsoft Store that you can then configure into Intune as what you want to deploy, and then creating the deployment specifically to a user or a user group. For a store app, you cannot deploy to the device. It has to be to a user and to a user group. Also, this is a good time to say, I'm talking about store apps here, the option to deploy a store app in Intune. What I'm not talking about is the ability to integrate Intune with the Store for Business, right, in the Microsoft Store. So that will be a separate session, but we are here just focused on deploying individual store apps that you would browse for and deliver that way. Also, the store app must be deployed as available. It is not possible to deploy a store app as required. And there's some mechanics behind that because the user will need to go get that store app from the store themselves, right? So shifting now to the user side, once you deploy that store app, then that store app will be available to the user in the company portal. Again, it is targeted to the user, not to the device. And so since it is targeted to the user, and also since it is available only, the user has to go get it in the company portal. And then once they are in the company portal, they're going to select to install the store app. And then all that's going to do is open up a link into the store for the user. So let's see this actually work. I want to show you configuring the app and then deploying the app to a device. So the first thing that I want to do is go get the URL for my device. So I'm going to search for Solitaire Microsoft Store. And I'm just going to click on the top level link here just to show you this should open up Solitaire. It does. So I'm going to go ahead and take this link and copy it to my clipboard. Now that's not the version of Solitaire that I actually have configured to deploy. I think I have the classic Solitaire configured to deploy, but the same process. Whatever app you want to deploy, find it in the Microsoft Store this way, copy off the URL, You will use that URL whenever you set up the app deployment in Intune. So let's go look at what I have configured. So I'm going to go down to Client Apps in Intune, and then I'm going to go look at Apps as soon as that comes up. Come on, there we go. All right, Apps, and navigate over to my demo client app, my store app. So here I have this. All right, so I'll just walk you through what I have configured. Um, Let me back up for a minute. So the part that I'm not going to show you because I've already got all these configured, so I'll go ahead and show it to you now, is if you want to add a new app, then just click on add and then you choose from the list what kind of app you want to load. So I'm just kind of walking down the list. Here's the store app. This is the Windows Store app. You do see there is for phone 8.1, right? So the 8.1 is supported there, but again, we're focusing on Windows, and the apps that come out of the store that we're going to work with are Windows 10, that one. And then you'll see me do Office 365 for Windows 10. You will see me do the web link for Windows 10, also line of business, and then finally Windows app. So that's the only part. I'm just going to show you the things that I've already configured. If you're configuring it new, that's the only part you'll need to do. So let's focus on the store app. So here, if I look at properties, just a few things that I have to configure. First, this is, again, a store app, and the app information is what I would need to configure, and that includes the name of the app, the description, the publisher of the app, and then specifically the URL. Those are the only four pieces of information that I must have, right? There are other things that you can configure here if you want to, such as categories, such as whether this wants to be, you want this app to be displayed as a feature app in the company portal for the user, right, to kind of highlight it. Any additional information URLs or privacy URLs or whatever other information, changing a logo if you want to. Scope tags, you're going to see this in many, many places in the console as we move around. Certainly not unique to apps. We're not going to talk about scope tags right now in this context because scope tags is kind of a topic unto itself. We will cover that in a session by itself, but suffice it to say for now, scope tags are very similar to scopes in Config Manager. They help focus the view and access and so on for different things in the Intune console, right? But that's it. So I've configured now the web app. Now, once I have it configured, I need to assign it, right? So now assigning is interesting. So I'm actually assigning to all users. Let me pretend that I'm not. I'm going to add a group, and then I need to make a choice. What is the assignment type? So the only assignment type available for store apps is available, right? And it's available for enrolled devices. And so you, like I said, you don't have a choice to make a store app required. Also, what you'll notice, I'll just go ahead and click this. What you'll notice when I say included groups, you don't have a choice except to deploy to user groups. How do I know that? Because for every deployment, you will have a choice to deploy that particular item, whether it be a configuration profile, whether it be a policy, whether it be an app, whatever it is, to either devices or users. And you can choose to deploy to all users or all devices. But here's the thing, how do you know which one you can choose? Because not all settings are available for devices and users, right? Not all settings are necessarily user settings, right? And so the way that I kind of gauge, and it's not perfect, but it kind of works, is by gauging what Intune tells me here. So if I only see all users, then I know this deployment can only go to users. It doesn't have to be all users, but I know it can only go to users because that's the only option I'm being presented. Whereas if I see all users and all devices, I know it can go to either depending on my needs, right? And so far, I don't recall ever seeing just an only and all devices. There may be that I have missed, but still, I use that as a gauge. And so the other thing to watch out for, so I've targeted this to all users. That's why it's grayed. I can't change it because I've already got that targeted, the one. But I can choose if I want to not target to all users and instead include a group. So let me show you this. And this, again, I'm just using the opportunity of the store app to show you this more broadly. And so now that I'm actually going into groups, I know I have two groups that start with app demo to device, and app demo to users. So the point of this is if you choose to use your own group and you browse for the group, that's fine. But Intune's not going to prevent you from choosing a group of devices, even though this deployment is not applicable to devices at all. So you could choose a group of devices here and send it out, and Intune would say, okay, thumbs up, but it would never get there because these can only go to users, as evidenced by the fact that we just see the all users group, right? Okay, so I've got mine deployed. Let me get rid of that. I've got mine deployed to all users as available. That's my only option. So let me pull this out and pull in my test machine so I can show you, right? Now on the test machine, oops, I pulled it into the wrong screen. Let me go grab it. Here we go. On the test machine, since this is only to users and also only available, the only choice I have is to access this in the company portal. So I'm going to go to the company portal, launch that up, and then we will see that app is here. I have not installed this app at all yet. I just have it available in the company portal, and that way you can see it here. But let's get this signed in for just a second, and then we will be good to go. All right, taking a little bit longer. Okay, here it comes. So in terms of apps, right? So I have these are the newest apps. I can also just go to the apps node and same kind of deal, right? Here's the store app Solitaire. It's available to me. If I click on it, then it's just going to tell me, hey, here it is, and view in the Microsoft Store. Like I said, this is not going to deploy the app. The user is going to have to choose to deploy the app by going to the Microsoft Store. So the inference here is the user does have to have rights to access the Microsoft Store in order to get these apps. Absolutely, right? And so once your deployment of the Store app through Intune is simply to help them not get lost in the number of duplicate type apps that are out there, right? There's a lot of solitaire apps out there. You might have one specific in mind that you want to give to the user, and this is the way to do that. So it's working to resolve this now. I think I've got a little bit of a slow internet connection here, so let it work for just a second, and we'll see that the Microsoft Store or the Microsoft app will come up. So let's try that one more time and see if for some reason it's having issues right now. Let's see. Hang on. Interesting. So I've tried to actually resume or refresh this several times. I've tried it on a couple of other PCs, and I'm getting the same response. So something must be going on with the Microsoft Store right now. But nevertheless, you click that link, it takes you to the Microsoft Store. You can get the app that way, and you're good to go, right? So sorry about that. Don't know why I'm not able to get to the store, but again, it seems to be happening on multiple PCs, multiple accounts. So it's not on my end, I don't believe at the moment. All right, so let's go ahead and pull the company portal out of the way and pull this machine out of the way. Now, in terms of uh, some tips, some troubleshooting kind of things specific to store apps. So just as a reminder, store apps can only be deployed to users or user groups. Right? Store app deployments are essentially basically just a link to an app in the Microsoft Store, kind of as you saw. Well, not as you saw, as I attempted to show you. At least you saw the store come up. So now I've not installed this ever. I've never installed Solitaire. But in terms of troubleshooting, if you have users that you're deploying store apps to and they are effectively installing them, then you can see the progress of the installation. So pull the Intune console back in here. Come on, Intune console. There we go. You can see the progress if you just go over to now, notice you have device install status. That's just a standard part of the console. It's going to say no information because I've not deployed to devices. User install information will also say no information because even though I've deployed to the user's never run this. It's never been attempted to be run, and so no information is going to be there. But if you do have active deployments and users actively installing, then you will see the users that have installed or attempted, and whether they've been successful or not. Another good place to go look at any kind of user-targeted deployment is in the main Intune node under Troubleshoot. So specifically here, there's a few things. You can actually, well, let me select the user first of all. So type myself in there. Oops. Well, if I can type my name right. There we go. Right? And so I'll select myself and hit OK. And then what's going to happen is anything related to me as the user or whatever user you select will show up here. So in terms of assignments, yeah, all the different kinds of assignments you can do are here. Client apps is by default, which is good. One useful thing is so there's not like drill down information here that I can go into to see what's going on with a given deployment and so on. But one thing that's useful here is you will see a full list of deployments that are targeted to a particular user. In this case, there's the store app that I've targeted to my user, and that's as far as I can go. But at least this is a way to validate that Intune has actually recognized that user was in scope for the deployment and set the policy down to that particular user. And so the user should have it and be able to proceed with the install of a given app. All right. So that's store apps. Now let's go forward. And the next one, Office 365. So deploying Office 365 is a big deal for a lot of organizations that are actively moving to or maintaining Office 365. If you've ever tried to deploy Office 365 without a solution such as Config Manager or Intune, it's very possible, but it involves a lot of uh, investigation to figure out how exactly to configure your XML and so on. Things that Intune and Config Manager options will do for you. So how does this work? Right. So effectively, how this works is a pretty simple diagram here. The deployment configuration details are going to be provided in Intune and supplied down to the enrolled device. Right. And then when it comes time to actually do the install, the device is going to go pull the Office install, honoring all the parameters you've provided from the Office CDN. Right. So just wanted to point that out. This is not a situation where you need to load Office into the Intune storage area because Office is already present in the Office CDN. It's just a matter of you need to tell the device which version of Office to pull and what specific details around that to pull. Right? Let me show you how that works. Okay, so pull back in the Intune console, and like before, I'll just show you the app I already have configured. Go back up to client apps and back over to apps. Right, here we are. And so here I already have the demo Office 365. Right, again, the only part you're not seeing me do is click on the add and then choose Office 365 Windows. So here I have properties, and so there's a few things I need to add there. First is uh, well, so this is interesting, right? Settings format. So settings format, you have two options here. You have configuration designer as I've selected, and then you also will have an option on the drop down called enter XML data. So that's a really interesting option because what that would allow you to do is basically take all of the configurations that you're going to see me make through the configuration designer and instead implement them through XML. Why would you ever want to do that? Well, maybe you already have the XML that you've created before you decided to use Intune, and you just want to import that and run with it. So that's one reason. Or maybe there's another team outside of the Intune team that wants to decide how Office gets configured for an environment. And so instead of giving them access to the Intune console, all you need to do is tell them, hey, build it in the XML, give me the XML. I will pull that into Intune, and then everything is configured ahead of time without the need for the Intune console, right? Most people use the application designer or configuration designer. So let's kind of walk through the options that are here. So first, app suite information needs to be configured. So here we're going to have, again, detail about the name, about the description, what kind of application it is, productivity, whatever. Whether you again want to display in the company portal as a featured app. Again, now this one's interesting because you don't have to deploy this one, Office 365, to users. You can deploy Office 365 to devices, as you will see, and then the company portal isn't really a factor, right? And we'll discuss that more as we go along. And then logos and such if you want, right? Now, the actual configuration of the app suite itself. And so here it's basically deciding which of the apps from Office do you want to install. And here they all are, right? And then once we have that, okay, what specific settings for the suite do we want? And so whether it's 32 or 64-bit, what channel we want to deploy for Office 365. And then one that's interesting is whether you want to deploy the latest version or is there a specific version that you need to deploy for your organization. And there's a lot of them out here that you can choose from, right, from the drop down. So I just chose one at random. And then other detail about do you want to remove any MSI based versions of Office when you install it and different things, right? And that's it in terms of the configuration options for Office 365. Once we have that done, now we are left with the need to assign Office 365 to, in my case, I deployed it to all users, but notice I don't have to. So I can click on Add Group, and now on the drop down, I have a few more options. I have available, like you saw for store apps. I also have required, and I also have uninstall. So I'm going to say required, and then scroll on down a bit and notice on included groups now I have two options, required for all users or required for all devices. Now, in my case, required for all users is grayed out because I already have a deployment required for all users, so it's not going to let me change that here, right, and get into a conflict situation. But you do see required for all devices, which tells you this particular deployment is valid both for users and for devices. You choose whether you want to use all users and all devices, or whether you want to use a specific user group containing your users and or devices, right? Okay, so leave that here. I've actually deployed that down. I have not installed it because Office is quite the large install, but I will show it to you. All right, so here we go in the company portal again, and you saw it already. Let's go back to apps. So you see here Office 365. So I'll go ahead and click on this, and I'll go ahead and install it now, and it's going to take a while. It's not going to finish likely while we're even doing this video, but it's in the process of downloading. It's going to start installing. We'll check back and see if it actually finishes by the time we are done. So I'll just go back over here to apps, right, and go ahead and minimize the portal and pull this out of the picture. Right. So that's installing Office and such on your devices. Now, same as before, I want to go through and show you what this looks like in terms of some tips and tricks. Now, the same tips and tricks that I shared with you apply here. The same tips and tricks I shared with you for the store apps apply here, right? Um, Being able to look in Intune and see the status for a given user. Now, in my case, I just clicked on install, so I doubt very seriously that I have anything related to the install here because it's not had time to complete. But same as before, since I did install this, deploy it to a user, I can look at the user install status, and as we progress, I will see detail for the individual user or users in a group that I have targeted and what their status is for deploying Office. Same thing over on the troubleshooting node. I can scan for a given user and make sure at least they are targeted for Office, assuming I'm deploying to a user. That's taking a second to load. What I will also show you, let me just go and pull this out because it's in the middle of the install, so I don't expect things to be lined up yet. What I also want to talk about in terms of tips and tricks, again, the Office 365 install details are delivered by Intune, but the actual files are pulled from the Office CDN, right? Also specific to Office, if you're having some challenges installing, there is the ability to enable what's called Office 365 ULS logging. Right? There's actually more that ULS logging will give you besides troubleshooting installation, but specifically for installation and specifically for patching, if you need additional detail beyond what's provided by Office itself, then you can add these registry keys that you see on the screen and be able to get that detail. Also, there's a tool called the Microsoft Support and Recovery Assistant that you can get at the URL shown, diagnostics.office.com, that can help you work through some various Office diagnostics type issues. Right? Okay. So moving on, web links now. So the specific scenario, how it works, kind of the same thing as the store app. The web link would be where you might have an application that totally runs from the web, and you want to deploy that out to your community so that they can have access to it. So the first thing, you would need to know what web link you want, obviously, and then the deployment in this case can either go to a user or a device, and you're going to go ahead and deploy the link. Right now, this can be also required or optional as a deployment. So when the web link actually gets to the target device, then it's going to be deployed either automatically because required is an option, right? Or the user can go to the company portal and run it from there. And once it's installed, however it gets installed, either by the user manually doing it or being required and automatically doing it, it's going to appear on the start menu for your OS. So let's go see that. So let's go. So what I've done is I've actually taken a link to the Microsoft Updates portal just as something I could demo as a web link. So yeah, no users here, don't have any data yet. We'll come back to that. Hopefully at the end of the session we might have something, but we'll see. So here's my web link that I've deployed, right? And here, very simple. All I have is uh, basically the name that I have to supply, the description, the publisher if there is one, and then the app URL. Right from there, I'm going to go to assignments, and here you see that I'm assigning to users. Right now, I'll add group just to show you again that you can have a couple of options here. One of them being required. Now you see four of them actually available for installed devices, available with or without enrollment if you want to, required and uninstall. And also, if I go select, let me just choose one. If I go select an included group, then you see that I have both all users and all devices available. Now, neither one of those are grayed out. Why? Because I have not deployed this to either all users or all devices. Instead, what I've done is I've actually deployed this to, let me go over one more, to a specific user group, right? And so that's why all users and all devices show up as configurable because I've not configured them anywhere else. Let me just go be clear, on this. Oh, sorry, that's the wrong one. I misclicked. Let's go do this one is what I want. Web link. All right, and so you see, yeah, here's a specific user group, and that's why. So let's pull the Intune portal out and go into my test device where I have this deployed as required, and you will see that it is nowhere to be found in the company portal. I thought I still had the company portal up. Company portal. Actually, that's not true. This was deployed to a user, and so it is in the company portal. The point is, it was required, and so it will be in a different section of the company portal. So let's go look at that. Come on, company portal launch. There we go. So while the company portal is launching, I will go ahead and show you that the link is on my start menu. All right, looks like my start menu is going to be delayed until the company portal progresses a bit. So we will wait on that for a second. Okay, there comes the company portal. Here is my web link right here, right? So if I click on my web link, it's just going to go to the web and open up my Microsoft Updates portal that I can see, right? So, but it is deployed. And then if I go stay in the company portal, then I will see under installed apps that this particular web link has actually been installed and is reflected here, right? So here's my web link. Okay, cool. So I'm going to minimize that again so that I don't wait on it to load, hopefully, again. And then in terms of working with and troubleshooting the web link, a couple of tips and tricks here. So again, web link deployments can be deployed either to user devices, users or devices. They can be deployed available or required, no problem. Web links are similar to the store apps in that they are deploying a shortcut link right to the web. Now, the way to look at this in the Intune console is the same way as we talked about for store apps. So since I have deployed this one, oops, go down here. Oh, come on. I lost it somewhere. Since I have deployed this one, I should expect some status here. And so I have deployed this to users, and sure enough, I will see my user and that I have one installation that has been successful. So for devices, I didn't deploy it to devices, so I don't expect to see anything there, right? But a good little way to see how things are progressing in your environment. Also, calling your attention back to the main troubleshooting node where you can type in the user if you deployed to a user and see that the app has deployed from there. Right? There's some other things that you can use in terms of troubleshooting around Intune as well, but these are some short and dirty ones, and I will share a little bit more as we go further in the series coming up. So let's remove that out of the picture, and you saw what's next. It is line of business. So there's actually two scenarios I'm going to show you here, very similar, but there's a little bit of a difference, and I want to show you one of them, assuming that it's the way that I think it is on the machine. This one is specifically deploying a line of business app. So in terms of how this works, same kind of diagram, is that you're going to deploy the MSI to the device, but as part of deploying the MSI, you're going to upload content for that MSI into Intune storage. Then when the device needs it, it's going to go to Intune storage and pull that MSI down, right? Now, I'm going to show you MSI. I'm going to show you MSI X. But there are a few different app types that you can support with line of business. MSI, AppX bundles, MSI X, and MSI X bundles, right? So very similar across the board. I'm going to show you these two. So in terms of configuring this and such, let's actually look at configuration I have. So this first one, again, MSI. And here I have two line of business apps. Right here is the first one. So this is deploying Robocopy out to the environment, Robocopy GUI. So as I go through this, you're going to see a couple of things. The first thing I have to do is select what file I want to upload into the Intune service. Again, reminder that any one file can only be up to 8 gig in size, right? That will be really important in a minute when we talk about MSIX, especially. But I've chosen the file to upload already set up that MSI. Now, if you look at my source directory for Robocopy, let's go actually look at it. Here, Robocopy, right here. It actually has several other files associated. Here's the point. When you are going to upload content to Intune, whether it be an MSI, an MSIX, an executable, whatever the case may be, you want your source directory to contain only the files required for that particular install. If you include other stuff in there, I've seen people, I've done it myself, put Notepad or something on the desktop and then want to upload Notepad into whatever delivery service that's being used at the time, Config Manager or Intune. The entire contents of the desktop are then scraped together and uploaded, and all you care about is Notepad, right? So the point, be as focused as you can be for your application. Make sure your source folder only contains the files for your specific application, right? Okay, So that's what you would do here is point at that MSI. It will upload into the service. While you're uploading into the service, you can't really do anything with this. In fact, a good tip is up here, right? You'll see this bell. So I don't have any status to show you, but as soon as you start uploading into the service, there will be a status here indicating uploading into the service. Wait until that completes, and you should see a completion here, so check. Once you see a completion here, you will notice that this app likely will still have a red banner on it saying application in progress, whatever. Until that banner goes away, you're not going to be able to do anything further with this application or this line of business app. You may need to refresh the console to get that to refactor and see that banner go back to a blue status where you can proceed, right? Once you have the uploaded content, you can go forward and configure. So I think actually, if I recall right, you can go configure this while you're uploading the content. You just can't deploy it. So you'll go ahead and put in the name, put in the description, put in the publisher, determine. Notice here, it's grayed out. So in what context should this actually run? Should this be the user context? Should this be a device context or the system context, right? So this is akin in Config Manager to the choice you make when you configure an admin to deploy it for the machine or to deploy it for the user. This is the context where the app will install. So if you choose for the user, it's going to try to use the user's credentials to actually get the installation done. If your user doesn't have the rights necessary, the installation is going to fail. That's why most deployments in Config Manager and in Intune are sent under the device context, the system context, so the system account can actually be the one doing the install. Ignore app version checks and different things that you might have here. Very familiar from other ones that we've seen, right? And so again, the only required ones are the first few. Once we have those configured and once we have the app finished uploading, we can go assign this, and you can assign I've got it to all users as required. You can assign it to devices or users. You can assign it as required, available, or an uninstall, right? And then as I go, let me just choose. I'll choose required, and I can choose my included groups. It can be all users, all devices, or specific user or device groups, just as we've seen, right? Okay, so in this case, I have deployed this as required. I'm going to jump ahead just for a minute and show you that, in fact, well, I'll just do it in order. That's fine. So let me pull the device into the picture here. And so we can see, if we just go look at the start menu, that Robocopy GUI has actually deployed onto the device. Where is Robocopy GUI? Let's go down to the R's. PQR. Well, it was here. Interesting. Let me see for a second. Well, that's interesting. It is here. I'm not maybe missing it here, but it definitely is installed. It was on the menu here a second ago. Robocopy GUI. Either way, if I go in and I search for it, it is here, right? So I can go ahead and launch it. No problems. It's installed because it was required from Intune. I don't know why it's not on the start menu now. Doesn't matter, I guess, ultimately for right now. But interesting. Also, the company portal closed. So let's launch that again. And we will see that this app is listed under the installed apps because it was targeted to the user. It's listed here under installed apps as complete. And here is my line of business. That is Robocopy. We're good to go. All right, so I will minimize it again. I'm trying not to close it. Let's see. And now the other thing I just want to check back in on, because I think it's made some progress here, is deploying Office, right? So you see Office is here. Let's just go down to W, and so, well, you at least see that it's making some progress because you see Office kind of in the menu bar and so on, right? So we will keep checking back in, on that and see if it completes and such by the time, just scanning to see if there's any other Office apps here. Here's, the Office indicator. Here's OneNote. I don't know if that's the app or the actual install, but either way, we'll check back in on this as we go along. Now, in terms of troubleshooting, I'm going to leave the desktop up for a second. Well, I'll pull it away and pull the Intune console out very temporarily. In terms of troubleshooting and tips and tricks, a couple of things here. So line of business apps can again be deployed to users' devices as you like. They can be deployed available as required as you like. Right? Now, in terms of troubleshooting, the same things apply. You can view the install status for the user, for the device, depending on what you've targeted in the Intune console. So here I have targeted the user, and so when I go and look, you will see that I, as the only user in the group, have successfully installed Robocopy. Same thing on the main troubleshooting node. Since we are deployed to users, you can actually confirm that as I've shown you. But let me show you a couple of more things now that we're in the world of line of business, right? So one of the things that's true about Intune is that we don't have logs per se, like we do in Config Manager, when apps are deployed through the MDM channel. That's a very, very important phrase I just said. When apps are deployed through the MDM channel. I will come back to that in a minute and remind you of the phrase, right? So I will look here and show you this. Last I looked was a little bit weird because this is, after all, my lab and things are constantly being messed with. So, oops, I don't think one of the apps that I deployed is actually where I'm going to show you, but you will see anyway. Right, so I'm going to go into Registry Editor. This is a very useful troubleshooting technique for applications that write to the registry, such as line of business applications. Right. Okay, interesting. So I do have, I do have what I thought. That's fine. So specifically, under HKey Local Machine Software, Microsoft Enterprise Desktop App Management, you will have the detail of the various apps that you might have deployed. Now you'll see other things, data protection certificates. You'll see enrollment information up here. You'll see modern deployments and so on. But specifically for these particular apps, you'll see who it was deployed to. So there's a system SID, there's user SIDs, right, in here as well. So I will look at this one as an example. So one thing you don't see in here really anywhere is the name of the application. You will see the specific details in terms of product ID, product code, whatever. But this is a really cool area for being able to see all sorts of detail about the progress of the install. Here's the status. There's the last error code up here. This did have an error when it was trying to install. You can see the status up here. You can also see the download location, right? Which is really awesome because let me go to the download location. There's a download location when you're targeting the device. There's a download location when you're targeting the user. So this is for the device. So system Windows system 32, if I can type it right, and config. So I'll start there. And then under config, there's system profile and app data, and then local, and then MDM. And here are the installs, or the downloads, if you will. And these are not identifiable by anything other than their product ID. It's not going to give you the file name. If you launch it, you can tell what it is, right? So in this case, it's the Microsoft Intune Management extension that has tried to install, and it fails. In this case, the failure is expected. Let me show you what I mean. So here's your install log, and if I look down for value 3, which is a good thing to do, oops, that's going up, which is a good thing to do in the case of MSI troubleshooting sometimes, you can already see, hey, the specified account already exists, so it's not going to install again. So again, that failure was kind of expected. But the point is, you get the download, you get the log as it tries to install, right? So very useful. Now, there's also a download location for the user. Let me show you that. So here under my profile, under app data, local, and then MDM. So here's one that came down for the user specifically. I can launch that again. So this is Robocopy GUI. Notice there's no MSI log there because it installed, right? It installed fine. And so this is Robocopy GUI that came down. Okay, fine, close, whatever I did. Uh, right, but this is very, very useful. So there was a case I was working on with a customer. It wasn't even related to Intune, it was more related to MDM and questions about how the MDM channel was working. Third party management solution was in play. And what they were seeing is that the downloads were just incredibly unpredictable. The upgrades from one version of an app to another were very unpredictable. And we were able to identify the MDM or the registry location for the app, and then specifically the download location, we could watch the bits job download, and it was incredibly slow. But that allowed us to really hone in on, hey, this is really a networking issue. It's not really an MDM issue. It's not really a third-party management, provider issue. It seems to be a network issue. In this case, it was right, and we were able to use the troubleshooting information I just showed you to help isolate and find that. Right, so good stuff. Okay, so let me remove this from the screen and continue on. And staying with line of business, but this time looking at MSI X, right? So MSI X works really the same way. Same way it's going to go. The MSI X gets uploaded to Intune. The MSI X gets downloaded from Intune storage area to the device, and so on. Now, let me just show you a couple of things. And since we just saw MSI, I'll move through this kind of quick since we just talked about it. So the MSI X is here, right? So here's my second line of business. It's a Windows Universal is what it's referred to by, but this is an MSI X. So if I look at properties, here you can see that it is in fact an MSI X file that I uploaded. This is rich copy converted to MSI X, right? But still, it's MSI X. Same configuration options as before for MSI. Everything's very similar. Assignments exactly the same. In this case, I'm deploying to all devices. So I've just shifted to all devices here, right? So you would not expect the company portal to be involved at all. And we'll talk about user deployments versus device deployments as we start to wrap up here in a bit, right? But the key thing I want to show you is I've deployed this to all devices. If I pull in my device, I absolutely do not have rich copy on this device, right? It's not here. And so I know that it's a failure, and I don't have the company portal to be able to look at. I don't have anything like that. I don't even have this in the registry because in this case, it failed before it really got started to install. So let's see what we do have, right? So this node that I've showed you before, where it'll kind of show you the installation state, can be very useful. So I'm hitting user install on purpose because I've not actually installed to the user, but even here I see a failure, right? Device install status, I will see a failure here, right? So this is interesting, why I have a failure. And so this particular device here, so this is the same device, one listing the user, no, the my name. Actually, as I've deployed this, what I think I did, if I remember right now, is when I first set this up, I deployed it to the user, and then I deployed it to the device. So my lab shows both. That's where the lab environment gets a little bit confusing sometimes as you try different things. But either way, the failure is the same. Notice what the failure is. A certificate uh, chain failure happened, right? So a certificate chain could not be established effectively. So what does this mean? So we did previously a session on MSI X. And the thing about MSI X deployments is that you can you can package them up all day long, but you're required to sign the MSI X with a certificate. There's no option not to do that, right? Well, when you do that, you can then deploy the MSI X to the end device, and that device itself has to trust that cert, has to be enrolled in such a way that cert so that it will trust the install of the MSIX. In my case, I did not ever deploy a cert to the device, and so the MSIX gets there just fine, tries to install without a problem, but it can't even launch correctly because it doesn't have the cert trusted, and so it just immediately fails before it does anything. And that was planned. I intended to do this just to show you that in this section, right? The other thing that I just want to comment on about MSIX, let me pull that up. So I mentioned the single source directory or the source files for sorry, I'm saying this wrong, the Intune storage space for a full paid subscription. You don't have any limits in terms of amount of content you can put there, but you do have a limit in terms of no single file can exceed 8 gigabytes. So when you do an MSIX, right, and other things too, right, the end result is you will bundle all of the information needed together into a single file. So if your MSIX file size exceeds 8 gig, it's going to be a challenge, right? Because you can't have a file that exceeds 8 gigs. And so I just point that out, right? Okay. So that is MSIX. The same things apply to MSIX as I just showed you for MSI. You can absolutely use the registry to track the install, assuming the install actually got to the point where it launched, right? So the tips and tricks very similar. The troubleshooting very similar to what I just showed you with MSIs, right? And is in general applicable to all of the kinds of deployments you could do with line of business. So let's get to the last one here. Windows app, Win32. So how does this one work? So specifically, when we talk about a Win32 app deployment, Windows app Win32, we're referring to deploying software that gets installed by launching an executable. So the first thing that you have to do is repackage that executable into an Intune Win formatted file, right? So you're again taking the content from the original source files and then repackaging it into the Intune Win. So you have one file. Well, the same things that we talked about a second ago apply here. How does this work? You're going to gather the media, you're going to supply source directory information, and then you're going to end up generating the Intune Win. And then the very first question is that Intune Win less than 8 gig? If so, we're good to go. Just keep going, right? If not, then we have to work on something. And specifically, what we're going to try to do is clean up any of your media, make sure that we get less than 8 gig. If we're successful, then we're good. If not, then we just can't use the solution in Intune because no single file can be bigger than 8 gig, right? But assuming we're good, then we go through the process of configuring the deployment. So we're going to select Win32, and then we're going to upload our file. Then we're going to configure app info and app installation detail and app requirements and all of these things, and detection methods and rules and requirement rules and also dependencies if we need to configure dependencies, return codes, and all of these kinds of things. And if you look at this and you think, wow, that certainly sounds like Config Manager, and specifically it sounds like the app model in Config Manager, yeah, you're right. It does, right? And so this is just further indication of the close working relationship that the Intune team and the Config Manager product teams have together. They sit in the same building, work on separate floors, but in the same building, talk all the time. And absolutely, this is the app model brought into Intune to be able to offer this kind of flexibility for this kind of installation. Now, again, this applies right now just to executable based deployments. Who knows what the future holds, right? But this is an option that we can use. So let me show this to you kind of in how it works. Let me pull in the Intune console. Okay, so here I have deployed my Notepad++, is what I'm actually installing right here. And a few configuration options. I'll go to Properties, and I will see that I have this deployment type selected. I get a warning about, hey, when you do Win32 app deployed and using Intune will not automatically remove the software from the device when the device is retired, just FYI. And then here I've actually uploaded my Intune Win formatted Notepad++ file. So I'm going to configure that. And so the configuration will be the name, the description, the publisher, all that detail that you've seen and come to be very familiar with through this process. Then I'm going to configure the program. Now, this is where I kind of got tripped up myself for a little bit, wondering why it wasn't working, right? You repackage the executable into the Intune Win. But the Intune Win is just a wrapper. When it gets to the device, you're not actually installing the Intune Win, you're installing the executable. And so you don't refer to the Intune Win here, you refer to the executable, give it any command line switches you need. In my case, the /s is to install silently. The uninstall command, the /u, I don't even know if it works. I just put it there as a placeholder, right? But you do need an install command line and you do need an uninstall command line to be able to go forward. Then you decide what is the install behavior. Is it going to be a system-based install or a user-based install? You can configure any requirements here. There are a set of requirements you have to answer. You can add more if you want, right? And then you will, if you click on add more, you can specify a script, you can specify a file, you can specify a registry key as a requirement rule for being present, whatever. And then once you pass that, then you can go to your detection rules, and you do need detection rules. Same kinds of ways. You can either manually configure or you can use a custom script. If you're going to manually configure, same option, registry or file or MSI, right? And then finally, we will get down to return codes. If you need to add return codes that are non-standard, you can do that here, or you can just accept the ones that are present and hit OK and be good to go. Now, over here in separate, but you can still configure it, are dependencies. So if there are other Win32 based apps that you have a dependency on for installing this one, then you can list them here. This is only Win32 based apps. So if I click add, and look, the only app that shows up is, in fact, this one. And it's grayed out because you can't depend on yourself, right? If I had other dependencies that I needed, they would need to be packaged as Win32 apps as well. And then I could choose them from the list, all right? But that said, I'm going to get rid of that. I don't have any dependencies. I will do assignments. So this particular one is going to go to all devices as required. Here we have the ability to deploy either as available or required or do the uninstall. And yes, you can target either devices or users here, no problem, right here. So I'm targeting all devices, so it's already targeted, so it's gray, or all users I could choose as well, but it's already deployed, right? So let me go ahead and pull back in my virtual machine, and we will see that. Let me get rid of that here, and get rid of this here. We will see Notepad++ should already be on the menu. Let's find it. Yeah, Notepad++ is here and was installed to the device because it was required. It won't be in the company portal because it's deployed to devices, right? But while we're here, well, okay, let me do this in the right order. Let me pull the machine out for a second. Oh, come on. There we go. And then pull the Intune company portal or the Intune portal out for a minute. All right, and shift over to troubleshooting tips and tricks, right? So here, Win32 app deployment. Remember the phrase that I said a minute ago? I said there is no logging for no traditional logging, file logging like Config Manager for apps that are deployed through the MDM channel. That's absolutely true. But when Windows apps, Win32 apps, are not deployed through the MDM channel. Instead, they are deployed through something called the Intune Management Extension. We'll have a separate session on the Intune Management Extension. I'll show you a little bit about it here, right? The target, and I'll show it to you in a minute, the target type for deploying a Windows app, a Win32 app, it has to be exe converted to an Intune Win file. That's the only type, nothing else, right? Now, in terms of troubleshooting this, same kinds of things can apply. We can view the install status down here. I have um, it was targeted to device, so I have my device install status should say that I'm good to go because it's been installed there. Yeah, so here it is, it's installed, right? Now also, I can go in, since I know this is using the Intune Management Extension, I'll just show that to you very quickly, right? So the Intune Management Extension, before I even show it to you, their MDM is built in to all Windows 10 devices. And there's a lot of capabilities offered by MDM. The vast majority of things that we do through Intune are done through the MDM channel, or implemented, I should say, through the MDM channel. But the MDM channel doesn't support all things that customers want to and need to do, right? So, for example, deploying executables is not something the MDM channel supports. And so there was a need to write an additional agent that will snap onto the device. It's seamless. You don't have to worry about it. Called the Intune Management Extension. This extension gets loaded either when the device is enrolled or whenever something requiring it is deployed to the device. Right. So it runs as a service. Arguably, you could say it is an agent running on the device, but again, it's a service. You don't have to install it. You don't have to worry about it. It's kind of self-maintained, right? And so if we go into services here and look for Microsoft Intune Management Extension, it's right here, and it's running as a service, right? So this is the service that actually does the install. And again, we'll have a separate session on it, but I will show you this one thing. So there's a couple of places that you will see the Intune Management Extension. But if you want to troubleshoot what the Intune Management Extension has installed, then you can go to Program Data and go to Microsoft, and then go to Intune Management Extension, and you will see logs, right? So the Intune Management Extension log is the key log that you will look at for tracking installation attempts that are made through the Intune Management Extension. So wonderful to have a log, for all of us config manager folks that are familiar with logs. Logs are amazing, and so great to have a log that we can leverage to kind of look at what's going on. Fairly easy to read, fairly busy too, depending on what you're doing in your environment, but fairly easy to read for sure, right? So there, that is, again, we'll have a session on the Intune Management Extension specifically as we go along, right? Okay, now in starting to head toward wrapping up this session, let me get rid of that from the console. All right, now so that's all of the different scenarios, and each one of the scenarios we've had a troubleshooting tips and tricks and how it works kind of thing. But let's back out of that for a minute and let's kind of go backwards and have a general overview, the tips and tricks kind of discussion here. And I've broken it out. There's tips and tricks here. I'll do troubleshooting on the next slide. So available deployments, right? When you can deploy pretty much anything as available. When you deploy something as available, you have no choice except to deploy it to a user. You cannot deploy something as available to a device, right? Why? Because when it's available, that means the user has to go initiate it, and users only have access to see what's been targeted to them through the company portal, right? So if you're targeting the device, you're not going to have that show up in the company portal. Therefore, the user can't kick it off. If you want it to be available and the user to kick it off, it has to be targeted to the user, which leads to the next thing. Should you target devices or users? Well, that's totally up to you. And the good news is you can choose in most circumstances, right? If your desire is to manage the device regardless of users, so maybe you're in a scenario where you have a 24/7 call center, people sharing PCs, right? Or maybe you're in a retail situation where when employees come into your retail location to work for the day, they pick up a device. It may be a different device each day. In those cases, you don't really care maybe about managing the user. Maybe you do, but you for sure care about managing the device. So you can manage the device all day long, and this applies to Windows, it applies to iOS, applies to Android. Here we're talking about Windows. You can manage the device by itself, target just to the device deployments that you care about, no problem, and it works great. And not even factor in the user. If you're not factoring in the user, you don't need the company portal on the device at all, right? Or you can add the user in and they can have the company portal and see things targeted to them. So you can do both. You can do either. It's completely and totally up to you, your scenario, what you want to do. Right? I'm including a document here, a link. As you do these deployments, you might run into some scenarios where, well, why did it do that? Why did it act that way? Right? The link here that I provided to apps-deploy will give you kind of a checklist of, hey, if you have this scenario where it's deployed, required over here to one user, available over here to another user, here's the end result of what it will be. Kind of the conflict resolution things that Intune is built to handle based on encountering different scenarios. So a very good resource for you. In terms of content, we've talked about this. Just want to make sure it's here, and I've said it a few times. If you have a trial Intune environment, then you are limited in terms of the size of the content to 2 gigabytes total. But if you are in a full deployment scenario, then you are not limited to the size of the content. You can have as much content as you need to get your business needs met. But you are limited to having any one file that is in that content. It cannot exceed 8 gig. If it does, you're going to have problems, right? And then one thing I put here is, what about scripts? And I put PowerShell, VBS, could be Java, could be batch files we're talking about here as well. In fact, let's talk about them. So PowerShell first. Can you deploy PowerShell with client apps? And the answer is absolutely. But the way that you would have to deploy PowerShell through client apps is to wrap that PowerShell in an MSI, right? Which adds an extra level of work to be able to get that PowerShell wrapped in the MSI. For PowerShell scripts specifically, the better choice is to actually use configuration profiles. We haven't talked about configuration profiles, at least in this section. We will have a separate session on configuration, or a separate series on configuration profiles. But in configuration profiles, you will see a PowerShell script section where you can upload and deploy PowerShell scripts, no problem. The PowerShell scripts run through the Intune management extension, right, just like executables do here. But you can do that. And so if you're going to deploy a PowerShell script, that's probably the preferred way to go. You could do it here if you wrap it in MSI. You could also deploy VBS, batch file, Java, whatever you want, but those have to be wrapped in MSI, right? If you need to do scripts like that, I would strongly urge you to use a PowerShell script because it's easier, but you can absolutely get it done through Intune by wrapping it in an MSI. Okay, so in terms of troubleshooting in general, I've showed you a lot about using the Intune console. I've showed you using the registry. I've also showed you the Intune management extension logs. One thing that I have not shown you that I will, because I don't use it that much, it's probably my fault that I don't, because there is some good information here. But there is a log in the event viewer that will help you with Intune. And what I've used it primarily for is enrollments, but there's other stuff there as well that could help you. It's under applications and services. So we'll expand that. Tell a few jokes while it's expanding because it takes just a second to actually get it done, but hopefully it'll be open here in just a second. Waiting on it, and there it is. Okay, so now if I go to Microsoft and Windows and go down to Device, so let's scroll down a little bit. Device Management, Enterprise Diagnostics Provider. There's some good detail in the admin space and the operational space that you can dig into. I'm not going to do it here. I'll just show it to you. Right, it's another troubleshooting option that you have on the devices. Now, another thing I want to show you, which I think is really interesting, and I show it to you really, yeah, to help use in troubleshooting, but to at least start to introduce it. Again, we'll probably have a separate session on this, but the Graph API. There's a ton of stuff that you can do with the Graph API. So let me pull up Edge here, and if you aren't familiar with PowerShell and you aren't familiar with the Graph API, we want to make it as easy as possible for you to use the Graph API because it's so useful. But let's look here. Graph, or let's see, Intune Graph. Sorry, API examples. And if you go to GitHub, you will see a bunch of them. So here's GitHub. And so specifically, we're talking about applications today. So all of these top level folders are categorizations. These aren't the scripts themselves. The scripts are within the folder. So I'm going to go to applications and look at the options I have. So I have a whole bunch of them. And specifically, I'm wanting to look at apps that are going down through the MDM channel, right? Now, let's just, and so here I just want to get a list of them, get some details about them. And so I'll just get the script. I'm going to grab it here. Here we go. I'm going to highlight it the first and then scroll all the way down to the bottom of the script and copy it to my clip. Come on, all the way down. All the way down. There we go. Hold shift, select it all, copy it to my clipboard. And then what I'm going to do is launch PowerShell ISE as admin. Yes. And it may still have the script there from when I was messing with it. No, it doesn't. That's fine. I'm going to paste it in, and then I'm going to run it. Right? Again, I'm not interested in the details of the script right now. I just want to show you what you can get from this. I'm going to log in. Okay, if I type that all right, then it will open up the Azure AD authentication module, and I'm logging in, and so now it's going to start spewing out results. And so these results are really interesting, right? These are all of my apps. Some of the configuration detail, you'll see the unique identifier assigned to my app, and so on, right? And that's as much as really I'm going to show you. But man, it's one sample script out of a whole bunch that are there, and the information you can get from the Graph API are things that you don't necessarily see in the console even. Like, notice every single app has a unique identifier. For all that, whenever we looked at the MSI apps, we saw that the app was coded into the registry by the product code, right? And um, it's very useful to be able to correlate those two and make sure that you know which one you're referencing. Do you have to do it that way? No, you can figure it out other ways, but it's a very useful thing. Right, so again, not telling you exactly the deep details of Graph API or how to use it or where it all correlates or things like that, but just want to show you that there's a world of options out there that might be able to help you in some cases um, solve some things differently or find information differently or whatever than what's necessarily in the Intune console, right? So I'm going to go ahead and drop out of that because I've shown it to you. And really, that's it for the session. We've gone through a lot of territory, right? A lot of different app install scenarios. Hopefully, it makes sense. Hopefully, you can see where each one has a role to play, right? And so we will wrap the Windows session here. The next Coming up next, we will talk about similar kind of things for iOS in a separate session, Android in a separate session, and go from there. So we will wrap it here, and we will see you next time.